I will now call to order the Tuesday, July 2nd meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council Fiscal Committee meeting. Welcome to all of you in attendance here at Carnegie Town Hall and those of you watching us on CityLink or on siouxfalls.org. I would entertain a motion for approval of the meeting minutes from Tuesday, April 2nd.
Move to approve.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved. Today we have one item on our agenda, and we will hear from Mark Cotter, Director of Public Works, on bond funding. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having us. Today we have with us a number of people that we know it's somewhat of a broad discussion, and so we've got our team with us here to try to, based on the questions that you may have the team members here to answer. Director Turback is here, Dean Borkhardt is here, Trent Lubers is here, Chad Heavey's here, Tom Birkeland is here, and we also invited Troy Larson with Lewis and Clark Regional Water System to come. I think just in sort of broad parameters, we'd start with the flood control. And again, a little bit of history on this flood control. As time was going on, the first phase of the three phases of improvements that were planned started in 2000. The federal government had identified that based on statistical flows, that the levees needed to be raised primarily on down south of Skunk Creek, that those levees needed to be raised about 5 feet. The city, in its own contribution, raised the 41st Street Bridge and reconstructed it. And then also there was improvements needed to the spillway and the diversion channel. We got to a point where about a $2 to $3 million project was occurring year after year, and then after Katrina, the federal government required a FEMA agency to update all their firm maps across the country. So they wanted to make sure that the current flood maps that communities were using across the country were as accurate as they could be. And so that's what generated the need to, when our maps were updated, that's what really generated our desire to accelerate the project, because we had a number of properties that went into the new floodplain as a result of the new mandate. And at the time, about $750 million went into the floodplain, which required those properties to start paying flood insurance. We knew the majority of those properties would come out of the floodplain once the levees were raised, and so that's when we took a delegation to DC, meet with our congressional folks, and then also meet with the leaders of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and broach the idea with them that we said, can you accelerate the project now with Katrina and the new maps? They at the time were not able to accelerate their funding portions, but they did commit in an agreement that if we advance funded the project, meaning not only our share but their share, that they would pay us back. And that's the premise of where we're at. Back in 2009, we did take an ordinance forward to the City Council to get authorization to issue $38 million worth of debt. We ultimately did not issue that full amount. We issued about $31.5 million and have started the construction of all the improvements since then. That also funded the reconstruction of the 41st Street Bridge. In general terms, I know the question is we've advance funded not only our share and a portion of the federal government share, and even before this action, since the project started way back in the year 2000, how much money right now have we advanced that we should expect to get back from the federal government? These are estimates, and until the project is complete, they won't be audited, but we'll at least give you a basis of where we believe those numbers are at. Tom Birkeland works closely with the Army Corps of Engineers out of Omaha. They've also checked these numbers based on their best estimates. And so right now, what we call the project cost or the project limit cost is about $65 million. The city's total estimated expenditures to complete the project is about $27 million. That not only includes our share, but what we've advanced the federal government. If you take the $65 million initially, our share is 25%. Federal government is 75%. We're fortunate that the state of South Dakota has agreed to split the 25% with us. And so it's 75, 12.5, and 12.5. Okay? So if you take the total project of what we expected to come in at 65 million, and you do the math of what we've advanced and ultimately minus off our contribution, 25% of 65 million is 16.25 million. The balance of what we've extended to them would have the overage of what we've sent to the federal government, about 10.7 million. So right now, if we were to reconcile the project of what we believe the final cost will be, we would expect that the advancement of what we've done to date and to complete the project would have the federal government owing the city back about 10.7 million. Just a couple of bases on time frames. The Corps of Engineers, if you've been on 60th Street North, some of the major projects are getting wrapped up. There's some substantial projects going on. They've recently brought in another assessment team, and things in general are looking very good, but they have flagged some additional structures that need work that Tom Birkeland is working on that will work to design, ultimately get those updated. We expect to complete the city project, what I'll say the city project, these final structures by March of 2014. We hope to have the certification of all the work that's done by April of 14 and have all the documents for the improvements submitted to FEMA by May of 2014. Okay? Once all the documents, all the as-built, the operational manuals, all that data has been submitted to FEMA, they typically have a minimum of a 24-month review period before new updated maps can come back before this council to be recognized. And so those are all projected time frames to bring you up to speed. So a lot of numbers, a lot of discussion. Where can we start to answer your questions?
Councilor Jameson.
All right, Mark, you did have a lot of numbers there. Is there a way you could get us that worksheet of details? I didn't know if, maybe I'm missing it, but the math that you did, maybe it really doesn't matter, but the end of the story is the 10.7 million.
Right.
Is that what you really wanted to make sure we got?
That's what I understood the question was, is of the dollars that the cities incurred and also advanced to the federal government, how much would we expect at the end of this project to request, essentially send the federal government an invoice for on the, they did sign an agreement with us that they would pay us back if we advance funded the project. And right now, our best estimate is $10.7 million.
Councilor Karski.
I don't know what kind of agreement we had. Was that approved by council, or is that just something done through the administration? Or
No, it was. It was approved by council.
Council back then?
Yeah.
How binding of an agreement, just out of curiosity? I mean, is it?
They certainly have their outs based on budget and based on, we can certainly share that agreement with you.
So if they can pay it, they will pay it, is kind of what you're...
That's correct, and they budget a certain amount each year for reimbursements, because this isn't the first time that a community has actually advance funded the project, with the goal of getting the work done much quicker so we can reconcile the right maps to recognize all the improvements.
One more, if you don't mind. Do we know what it's costing the citizens of Sioux Falls, those people that live in that floodplain, it increased expenses for buying insurance, businesses, private employees. And to follow up with that, has this slowed down any construction in any of those areas because of the floodplain, the firm maps being changed?
You know, that's probably a really good question to have Jeff Schmidt, and I apologize I didn't bring Jeff. He's actually, he deals with a lot of those property owners. Potentially Tom Birkland has heard some of those levels.
There are several properties, Meadows in the river area, the hotel, Sweetman and
For our
Johnny
listening
Carino.
audience, would you introduce yourself,
Oh, Tom
please?
Birkland with City Engineering, excuse me. That area is in the floodplain. Some of it is in the floodway. They cannot build there. I know they want to build a new hotel in that area, or like to, and other areas. The cost, when you figure a starter home on West 10th Street and Williams Avenue would pay around $1,000 a year for flood insurance, on up to other businesses and that would pay $10,000 or more. 1,500 properties, it's several $1 million that are paid in flood insurance
Every year.
every year.
That's right.
Thank you. Councillor Entenmann.
I'm kind of reminded, Mark, of the Field of Dreams, you know, something along the line, if they build it, they will come. Well, in this case, if they build it, they will pay, maybe. So it's kind of interesting how that works. But I think the good note here is that we got the dike system is being built, and hopefully we're going to be in a position here, if I'm not mistaken from what you said, in May of next year and submitting the respective paperwork to FEMA. Unfortunately, it's another 2 years for their certification before we're going to be able to have some insurance relief for our citizens. Is that correct? About 2 years?
That's what we've been instructed, that we should prepare for at least 24 months. That's right.
Okay, thank you.
I think maybe with the numbers, I can probably just hit them one more time just to make it clear. Right now, the total project cost we have at $65 million. The federal government agreement was for them to pay 75%, the city to pay 25%. So the city share is $16.25 million. Again, we'll split that with the state, and the state's been very good to, as we've submitted for their share, they've paid it. Based on the bond funds and other contributions that we've made, the worksheet calls out for the federal government to pay us back right now an estimated at $10.75 million.
Any other questions for Mark on the floodplain issue? Councillor Jamieson.
The additional improvements that were needed, some structures or something you talked about that were going to get handled, the money for those were already in the bond that we could use, right?
That's right. We have available proceeds that we can use. To us, we've certainly wished that those structures would have been identified early in the process, but with the respective teams that come through at their different stages, they've been recently flagged, and so we're quickly making those changes. In some cases, they're fairly minor. In some cases, we're removing essentially a culvert that goes through the levee system with a control gate, and we'll replace it. So we can work through those issues, I think, relatively quickly.
If I could, the conversation going back to the FEMA reimbursement discussion, Mark, were you thinking that perhaps that the funding that comes in from the ice storm and the disaster declaration, that those funds could be then diverted or put towards the bonds for payment back to those bonds that we use to help pay them off for the increased levies, so that in essence, I mean, it kind of all comes back to FEMA and those guys coming in and assessing our city and determining that there was a disaster here, and we went and borrowed this money to raise our levies, to prevent our own disaster, which I think was a very wise decision. But now they want to come and give us money back in another department and another budget. Are you recommending that we would take that money and then you collect it from FEMA, but then use it and come back and pay off some of the bonds that we use to protect ourselves?
You know, my initial thoughts would be we treat them separate. You know, they're two separate instances. I look at it that the dollars from the disaster come back in to restore or a portion of our reserves to where they were. You know, some of those are going to be local costs that are not going to be reimbursable, and with the state and federal, that is 85%. So that to me allows the reserves to be restored. The component of the flood control, I'd certainly like the federal government to pay us back for the 10.7, so we can reduce that bond amount, and then ultimately it starts to reduce the amount of sales tax dollars that we bookmark each year to service this note that ultimately will be paid off, but it's going to be a number of years. So my initial thought is we treat them separate. I think that you know, we've had a major disaster in April that cost the city initially $9 million. We're certainly hopeful that a large percentage of that gets some assistance on. And then again, I think, you know, our original agreement on the flood control, they identified that these levies needed to be raised. They committed to paying 75% of these levies to be raised for the public good. And so my recommendation is we treat them separate.
Other questions for Mark? Mark, those funds for the floodplain come out of the CIP budget?
They do get appropriated each year. Yep. Like when the bond ordinance was brought forward, normally as a part of the same ordinance, we'll ask for the funds to be appropriated. Since you've already made the action to take out the debt service, I can confirm that, but if not, it would then just come in the next respective year on authorization.
Okay.
Okay.
Lewis and Clark.
Okay, just probably real brief. Lewis and Clark, you know, we've been one of 20 members for a number of years. It's been a great resource to be connected to the Missouri River. It's a good, clean water source. We did receive water in 2012, as the commitment agreements state. Our cost for our 28 million gallons, irrespective of some details on an interim true-up and costs of future wells, the issuance for a $70 million bond, about $64 million of that was our prepayment for our 28 million gallons of water. We know that in coming years that we had a very favorable bidding climate when they built the plant and a number of the pipelines, that when we ultimately call for our additional wells to be built, we have a portion of that funding that we may be required to pay based on how our balance sheet is, similar to the long list of numbers that we have in the flood control, but we're working closely with Lewis and Clark on that when those dates come. We don't today expect to call for those additional wells till probably 2022 in that time frame, but we'll just see. We'll kind of gauge that based on our daily demand. Our customers are very good with conservation, managing their water usage, and continuing. Every fixture that comes out now is a low flow device, and so you can get more out of fixtures today per capita than what you can in the past. But the short history is, when Lewis and Clark was originally formed, we asked for 10 million gallons of water. And then, I don't recall the entity that actually backed out, but there was an entity or entities that backed out, and there was some available capacity that came up, 1.2 to 1.5 million. So it took our base capacity with Lewis and Clark to just over 11 million gallons of water. In 2004, we did a study, updated our city's population projections, and identified that we needed more water from Lewis and Clark if it was available. So we asked for an additional 17 million gallons of water. And so it kind of gives you the trend that from our initial, we were in for 10 million gallons of water. Then there was unallocated capacity based on a member getting out, took us up to 11, and then we asked for an additional 17. Our bond, or our proceeds that we've prepaid in the order of $64 million does provide us that 28 million, irrespective of the additional wells, and we have agreements that address how those additional wells will be paid for. So, outside of that, I think that there was a question on, did we also advance a portion of the federal share as we did the 64 million, and we didn't. That has always been the amount that we were due to the system as our prepayment. So what questions do you have on Lewis and Clark that we can potentially ask? It is a 30-year note in terms. Since there was a number of years where we were not going to have water, we set that initially up as the first 6 years were interest only, and now in 13, this fall, we actually start paying principal and interest, and so we're essentially into year 7 of that 30-year note.
Questions for Mark?
We also have the executive director here as well from Lewis and Clark. If you have any questions, Chad Heavey is our delegate on the board, and Trent Lubers is the alternate, so we can source them as needed.
Councilor Karski.
We keep, or I should say, you keep using the term that we advanced the federal government this money. We borrowed it to them. I mean, were there any terms on the note other than you can repay us if you have the money? I mean, are we time value of money over 30 years? What did we borrow the money at? What did we have to bond it at? Is that part of the agreement?
It was part of the agreement that the federal government will not pay interest on the dollars, and will not. And so, as the flood control, it is principal only. And we looked at the time cost benefit that with all those properties going into the floodplain, really with still in most cases $0 appropriated every year. It would always have to go back in as congressional ads or earmarks, and at the most they were in the $2 to $3 million range. It would have taken us many years to complete the flood control project. And in most cases, the dam, for example, that's built out there right by the confluence of Skunk Creek and the Big Sioux River, that's just over $3 million. So just that one structure would have taken one whole year's allocation. And so when we started to see what people were having to pay in flood insurance, and I've heard some real high numbers with some commercial properties, we felt it was the right thing to do with such a large portion of the city going into the floodplain to, what I do say, advance their share with the expectation of them paying us back.
Other questions? Since we have Troy here, is there anything he'd like to say? He's fine. Okay. If there are no other questions, thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate your report.
Yeah.
Is there any other business to come before the committee? If not, Councilor Jameson.
We had talked some time ago about the Costco TIF project as a open discussion during a informational some time ago, that perhaps the Fiscal Committee would review that TIF and ask for community development to maybe be a part of that. And I think they were undergoing some revisions and changes to the TIF program. So I just want to put it on the radar.
Make sure it's put on an upcoming meeting agenda. We'll have David Bixler take care of that. Thank you for the reminder.
Okay, good. The other thought was this. We talked a little bit about the FEMA money that we're getting in the ice storm event. There's a lot of discussion about that. Some people feel for sure that we should just accept it and replenish our fund, but perhaps this is getting that money back from FEMA and then reapplying it to an expense that the city has because of FEMA could be a good tie-in. Otherwise, if it goes to the general fund, there isn't, I guess we'd have to write an ordinance or do something to transfer funds to make that kind of a payment. Otherwise, and I know we're kind of waiting for the budget to come out and to get finalized really maybe before it's all a good decision can be made about what's the best plan moving forward. But I think there could be a potential connection there that we should consider.
I wish Mark was still here because I've had the question asked of me if the council has ever dealt before with those FEMA funds, or if they were just used to replenish. You know, I don't remember us taking any type of action with the funds we received with the sewer disaster.
Yeah, I think they were. You know, the council certainly does the appropriation of those funds when they come in, but in those cases, it was pretty somewhat minor.
We were talking, so I didn't hear.
No, thank you for coming back, Mark.
Yes.
Mike, I've been asked, as far as in the past, what role the council has played at talking about when the sewer system, the collapse, and we received FEMA dollars for that, right?
We did.
Okay, and I don't remember us as a council taking action. What kind of action do we take? Or do we take any kind of action?
The way the sewer project happened, similar to what is occurring on the disaster, that project cost about $1.5 million to bring the contractors in and make that repair. And then through the auditing of what was eligible, we received a check from FEMA of about $900 and some thousand. Okay, that went into the water reclamation fund. That goes in, that's the enterprise funds are unappropriated funds, but that's essentially how that worked. We had authorization in other projects, say in a project called Other Mains in the capital plan that had balance in it. And then we immediately just went out and hired the contractors to do that work, and then we waited for those dollars to come in. Okay. Now on FEMA, similar situation. The street division of Public Works has an annual budget of just over $14 million. And so since we were so early in the year, we had a lot of our annual appropriation available. So we just immediately shared that we're gonna go forward, we're gonna assemble the forces, we're gonna use the appropriation that the council gave us and hire those contractors, but we knew that we would need to come and get a supplement to reconcile those dollars. And you did. You granted us that to now allow us to right size. So we're continuing to patch potholes, sweep streets, clean out drainage ways, those types of activities, pave streets. And so things are, from a budgetary standpoint, somewhat back to normal. What's occurred, though, is that the cash in your reserve account has gone down by the $9 million or the $8 million. What will happen, as I understand it, is that, and we've been working closely with FEMA to reconcile the actuals and make estimates on what remains. And then once they determine what remains, then FEMA will send the state a check for what qualifies for all the different agencies in the state. Sioux Falls will likely be one of those. And then we would expect the state to write the city a check, and it just essentially goes right into the unreserved account. That's all the action is.
It goes right into the...
It would just go right into...
To the reserve?
Right into the reserve account, because ultimately that's a general fund.
Okay.
Your role is, if you wanted to do something with those dollars in the reserve account, you could then bring it forward to City Council and authorize it if you needed to. We wouldn't recommend that. We would just say, let's restore the reserve account and now get ready for the 2014 initiatives for all the different divisions. And so at this point in time, I'm not aware that you have a role in appropriating any of those funds. Okay?
Yeah. Counselor Jameson?
Yeah, Tracy's here as well.
Tracy, do you have anything else that you'd like to add to what? I guess that was my understanding of how it would work from the beginning.
Okay, well, I'll ask the question. I thought we had a role in appropriating that money when we did receive it. So that's all. If I could ask Tracy if he has a minute, just to, maybe I heard it wrong and that happens, but let's clarify it.
Welcome, Director Turback.
Good afternoon. I think Mark described it exactly right, that the dollars, when they come in, will go into the general fund and be deposited and in effect restore or replenish our reserve account. The council has taken action, as Mark mentioned, to appropriate reserve dollars to replenish the budget for the street department and some of the other departments that incurred unanticipated costs. That would be it in terms of council action, unless you choose to utilize those dollars for something else. And I think that was mentioned at a recent, I don't know if it was a council meeting or informational meeting, that if the council wants to take whatever money comes from FEMA and appropriate it and send it to a community in Oklahoma for relief, I don't know that is even allowable under state budget laws, but that was one thing that was suggested, I think, by one of the council members, that would be a potential use for those dollars. But it would take an appropriation from the council to make that or anything else happen in terms of how those dollars are used.
Okay, I think I get it. So really, in reality, anytime we wanted to take money out of that general fund to appropriate for anything, the council would surely do that. But when the funds come in, they just go directly in to the reserve funds or to the operating budget without any action from the council.
Right, they will go into the general fund just like, essentially like any other revenue that comes into the general fund, like a property tax or a sales tax.
Okay.
And at the end of the year, that will be part of the money that is left, which represents our reserve funds.
Very good. I'm clear now.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you both for returning to the chamber.
Yeah.
If not, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned.